All right, I think we should be live and rolling, and I think we're also recording now. Welcome everyone to, I think if the numbers are right, if I'm not completely confused, it should be week 8, class 2, which is the 14th class. This is really the 9th week, but we pushed off last class to this Sunday. And sorry again for all the technicalities. Hopefully now we're rolling and we could get some stuff done. So please confirm if you're hearing me. Okay, all right. I'm seeing some confirmations. If anyone can't hear, make sure you're joined with audio. And please remind me once in a while to check if there's still anyone in the waiting room, because the way this impromptu meeting works, I have to admit anyone who's waiting in the waiting room. So I wish there was a way how to automatically admit anyone from the waiting room. Maybe there is such a thing, but I'm not sure about it. Okay. All right, hopefully it works. So welcome, and let's get back to some more hands-on coding going on over here. So just to recap a little bit the end of what we covered last time, it may have been just a little fast in the end. So in short, what we were trying to do was we were trying to demonstrate the idea of if we obtained a bunch of data from a database and we got that data in the form of JavaScript variables. We learned about objects. We learned that an object can have inside of it several different properties, several different variables, and you can store a whole bunch of these objects inside of an array, one after another after another. The first one is going to be element 0, the second one element 1, the third one element 2, etc. And inside each and every one of them, they're each going to have their own this property, that property, the other property. So imagine if we got that information out of the server, out of the internet, and now we have this as a variable, well, more specifically, as a bunch of properties inside of objects that are inside of an array. So if I have an array of all of these records, I can loop through them one by one, and I can put them into the page. I can create the HTML necessary to make the page stuff show this information, to show these records. And so just to recap a little bit, we learned about this new kind of string that starts with a backtick and ends with a backtick, but this is really very much like the standard string that we were always using, like when you were doing alert. When we were doing alert, and inside of the alert, we were putting double quotes, and then we were typing strings like hello, whatever, blah, 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 right? And then if we wanted to put something else together with that, we had to use a plus symbol, and then we put maybe a number 50, and then we did plus some sort of variable, and then we did plus another string, right? So this is really the same idea over here. We're kind of putting something together with something else, together with something else inside of all the same string over here. So just to illustrate that, let me show you guys how you do the same exact thing with the old style string, with the double quotes, not with the backticks. So I'm going to delete the backticks over here. Instead, I'm going to open up double quotes, and then I'm going to close the string at the end with another double quotes. Unfortunately, though, we have a few problems. First of all, when you use double quotes, it can't go on multiple lines. As you can see, the colors aren't working out over here. The red squiggly line is showing me an error. This doesn't work. You can only do double quote strings that open on the same line and close on the same line, and then you have to use the plus operator to put them together. But the other major issue is that inside of your string, inside of the HTML code that we're writing over here, we have some more quotes. And these quotes are confusing to JavaScript. JavaScript thinks that here we start a string, and by the next double quote, that's when we end a string. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to open a string here, end it at the end of the line with a plus symbol, and in the middle, these should be part of the string. That shouldn't close off the string and then start it up again. But how are we supposed to do that? So if you guys remember, there's a few ways to do that. You can either escape the double quotes, so that now they're special double quotes. They're not just the kind of double quotes that opens and closes a string. They're actually a literal character of a double quote inside of your message, inside of your text, inside of the HTML here that you're trying to put in with jQuery. That's one solution. Another solution is you can use single quotes. If your string has a lot of double quotes and you don't have to keep backslash double quote, backslash double quote, backslash double quoting over and over again. And yes, everyone, please try avoiding to annotate all over the place. Let me see if I can block that so that you do not have the temptation of spreading graffiti all over the screen. Disable participants annotation with your apologies. With my apologies to you, that is. Okay, so instead of having to continuously just also disable. I'm not sure. Anyway, back to the lesson at hand. How do I? So this was another way of how to deal with the double quote situation over here is to backslash them. Or if you don't want to keep backslashing double quotes, you can just surround it with a single quote so that your string starts and ends with a single quote. And inside of your string, you can have as many double quotes as you want. And the only thing is that you're going to have the same issue of single quotes. If at any point in your string you want to have some single quotes, JavaScript is going to get confused. Like, hey, I'm not sure what this single quote is supposed to do. Do you want that to be part of the message, part of the text that's being shown as part of the string, or is it supposed to be the end of the string? So you can either backslash single quote, or you can use the other type of quote. So depending on what kind of text you're going to have, if your text is going to include a lot of single quotes or double quotes, you're going to probably decide to use the other quote. Give me just a second, guys. I'm sorry about this. Just give me a second. Sorry about that. So apparently the writing on the screen was actually trying to get my attention because some guys were waiting to be admitted into the room. Thanks for that. I apologize. Okay. Hopefully all the technicalities will be resolved by next class, so everything should ideally run smoothly by then. Having said that, I just wanted to demonstrate real quickly how you would make this big string of HTML, which by the end of last class, I showed you guys how we do it with a single backtick in the beginning and a single backtick in the end. And that makes one big long string in JavaScript, which you can put inside of it a whole bunch of stuff, whatever it is you want to put in there. And we put in there a bunch of HTML text that jQuery should try to stuff into the page. But now, just to get the right idea of what it's all about and what it means, what would it look like if you guys use the other string? So here's what it basically looks like. I open a single quote over here, and I end a single quote at the end of the line. Then I go to the next line, and I use the plus character to mean that I want to squish together several strings together over here. I open another single quote over here. I go on to the variable here, and I close the single quote. Then I use the plus character to squish the rest of the string together with the value of this variable. Just like, again, when you guys remember when we did alert many times, then we alerted a piece of a string, and then we alerted a number, or maybe we alerted a variable that we wanted to include as part of the string together with the rest of the text, and then we squished it together with another string, right? This is called concatenation. Concatenation means to put together multiple pieces of stuff together and put them all as one big string of text together. A string meaning, a sequence of characters of text that you want to show on the screen, or show as a message, or show as a pop-up alert, or whatever it is. Anything that uses text is called a string of characters, a string of text. So just like we did that over there with the plus symbols, the same thing you can do over here with your HTML string plus this variable, which happens to be inside of an object. So we say the object name dot the property inside of that object. And then we use this plus symbol again, single quote, and then by the end of the line, I finish that string. Now I have to go and keep repeating this for every single line. Plus, opening and closing, single quote. Next line, plus, opening and closing, single quote. And in the middle, we have a variable. So I'm going to close off this single quote, and I'm going to add a plus before and a plus after, right? All this is doing is this is squishing together, this is concatenating together a bunch of pieces of text. First, jQuery, I want you to put in this HTML tag, then put in the next HTML tag, then put in the value of this variable. Okay, now put in the next HTML tag, now put in the next piece of information of this variable into there, and so on and so on and so forth. Put all of this together as one big long piece of HTML. This is altogether going to amount to similar to what would have happened if you typed all this HTML yourself in the page. jQuery is going to take all of this text that you're writing over here and also putting it inside the page as if it was there to begin with, as if it was some valid piece of HTML. Don't forget the plus symbol at the beginning of the line, and another quote, and another plus. And we can get rid of the last backtick over here. And there we go. This would be the same kind of thing as we had before, except now it has a lot more single quotes at the beginning and the end of each line. It also has a lot of plus symbols at the beginning of each line. And anytime you want to embed another piece of information inside of it, anytime you want to put a variable inside there, like we want to have the image link, we want to have the text or whatever it is, then you'll have to put it together with plus symbols, jumping back out of the string, jumping back into the string, back out of the string, back into the string. Here we're inside of just, this brown text that's part of the quoted string text. That's the string. Now we're jumping out of it and we're putting a variable as part of the mix. Then we're adding onto it another piece of string, putting it all together into one big long piece of information. And that turns out to be one big long thing that we're giving to jQuery. And we're telling jQuery, take all of this stuff, whatever it is that it ends up being, once it's going to be one link. Another time it's going to be another link. Each time around, whatever text results to be over here, put that right into the page, into this exact place. Go to this element over here that you find at this point in the page, all the HTML that's there, find that specific element, and append, which means add inside of it, at the end of it, all of this HTML. And as we tested last time, that actually worked pretty nicely. And it went through each of the pieces of information that we had, each of the records, number 0, number 1, and number 2. And each time around, it put that information in the right spot. While we're here anyways doing this, I'll just make a quick, very important note, something to do with security. There's a bit of a problem over here that could happen if you're not careful over here. Some people could possibly even hack your website and get people to send private information to them, or to put in their name and phone number, or maybe even credit card, or maybe even social security number, if you're not careful with this specific thing over here. Why? It's a little bit complicated. You guys can Google about it and find all the details about it as you're learning, as you go along. I'll leave that up to you guys to discover. There's probably going to be a few clips on YouTube somewhere that explain this at length. But let's just put it very, very simply like this. Sometimes you are going to be putting in there some stuff which accidentally can put in other HTML. For example, maybe you're going to put in someone's name one day, right? Or maybe you're going to put in someone's address, right? One day that's what's going to happen. Your piece of information, right? Your record that you got out of the database, the stuff that you want to put into your page, is going to have someone's name and someone's address, right? And what could happen is that someone can type in their name, could be anything, right? It could be they typed in John. And it could be that for their address, they typed in 123 Main Street. But that's if they were being a good boy and behaving as they should. But what if they were a hacker and they wanted to be a bad boy? So then, if they wanted to be sneaky and evil, they could do something like this. My name is closing tag, opening tag form action equals myhackywebsite.com. And then I'm going to also say that my name is, let's say something like input. This is still part of a comment, so I'll just put the comment in there also. Input type text, and then write what is your name or what is your social security number, and then close the form tag. All right, so imagine someone is very, very naughty and someone says, my name is closing HTML tag, open HTML tag, form, action, myhackywebsite.com, input type text, what is your social security number, closing form, and that's my name. And obviously you wouldn't expect someone to type that in there. Like, obviously that's not someone's real legitimate name. But if they wanted to be a hacker, they could type that in as, yeah, this is totally my name. You know, that's, my parents always called me little opening tag and closing tag. I was known as Taggy around the house. And what happens is that if someone types in malicious code inside of that field name, and you as a programmer, you just went ahead like every day and you're like, oh, okay, that's your name. So I'm going to take that name and I'm going to save it into my database on the server. And one day it's going to get time to pull that stuff out of the database and to show it to you in the web browser. I'm going to take this name with all this malicious code, and I'm going to do exactly what I just showed you guys to do here with the pluses and with the strings, putting this variable inside of your HTML code. And what's going to end up happening is something very sneaky. Instead of there showing up a simple name over here, like my name is John, right? That would be safe. That would be normal. That would be expected. Instead, what's going to happen is there's going to be a closing tag here. So that means that your image tag that you started here is going to be conveniently closed. Okay, so that tag is done. That tag is finished. Now it's going to start a new tag. And it's going to inject in here basically a whole bunch of unwanted HTML that you didn't account for, but that someone managed to sneak into your website. Why? Because if you take blindly whatever anyone gives you and tells you is their name, and you do just what we showed you to do over here, pasting a variable into your page and telling jQuery, hey, take all that stuff and put it right into the page. It might end up in a situation where someone is being asked, hey, please just confirm your credit card number, please. Or please just type in your social security over here. And then they click enter, they click submit, and that private information could be sent to a third-party hacker's website, which is not your website, and they could gain some information that hapless, innocent users that were just trying to use your website just wanted to go and use your website. But because we blindly pasted in here anything, whatever it is that was in that variable, it's possible for there to be a security problem. I do have to warn you, though, this is a little bit advanced. So if you didn't get that, that's actually perfectly fine. Don't worry about it too much. What is important to learn over here is how you create your HTML into your page, how you could tell jQuery, here, take all of this text that I'm showing you and put that as HTML tags into the page. There didn't used to be a LI over there. There didn't used to be a div and an A tag and all that. And now put all that in there so that magically the page suddenly does have all of that HTML. And just be aware that anytime you paste a variable into your code like that, be wary as to whether someone might put in something malicious in there, and you might want to be careful about that and prepare for that. How do you prepare for that? How are you able to make sure that this is safe? There's a few different things to do that you're going to learn about when you learn server-side code. In terms of JavaScript, I would create a function called, I actually created this function a few times myself. I needed it in a few situations. You make something like function sanitize, and you pass in the string that needs to be sanitized. And inside of the sanitize function, you Google how to sanitize some stuff for HTML. because I'm not going to explain it to you now and it's going to take too long. So let's just Google it. HTML, JavaScript, sanitize. Let's see if we have a function that does that. This one has too much code. Let's go to the next one. Oh, this is an entire software package. Here, let's find a simple HTML sanitizer in JavaScript. Come on, nothing simple over here. Oh, there we go. Here. Okay, I would just copy out this whole entire function over here, paste it in over here, and it basically does this smart thing where it goes through every piece of the string and it replaces the opening tag with the correct HTML character entity for that. As you guys might remember, in order to make a copyright symbol, you could do something like ampersand, copy, semicolon, right? And if you want to do a registered trademark symbol, then you can do ampersand, reg, or something like that. And that makes the little OR symbol. And the same thing, if you want to make this symbol in HTML, you're not supposed to write the exact character of the angle because that's special for HTML. HTML tags open with the angle bracket and they close with the angle bracket. Instead, you're supposed to do something like ampersand LT semicolon and ampersand GT semicolon. And that's instead of those dangerous characters which are supposed to be part of HTML. Instead of this one, you make ampersand LT, and instead of the other one, you make ampersand GT, and that automatically neutralizes this entire threat. It replaces all of the dangerous HTML with just plain old text. So this angle bracket over here becomes ampersand GT semicolon. This one over here becomes ampersand LT semicolon, and in the text, it's still going to look normal. In the text, it's still going to look like, oh, this guy's name is angle bracket, form, action, my hacky website. Okay, I guess that's his name. It's going to appear very normally just like that. But it's not going to cause the hacky thing, which is to insert unwanted HTML tags, actual HTML tags into your page by sanitizing all of the dangerous HTML with the replacement that they're supposed to be. In other words, if you're expecting there to be text in here, there shouldn't be any HTML in there. If you are making HTML, then that's not expected to be text. So over here, when I'm inserting a piece of variable inside of my string, I only want it to be a certain value of text. I don't want it to be closing tags, opening tags, creating new HTML that I didn't expect to be there. I just want it to be plain, simple text. So I can make sure with a sanitize function, like something that you can find on Google, it makes sure that the variable is going to be clean, it's going to be safe, and it's not going to have, oh, there's another hacky way of how to do it. You create a div, and you insert the text into the div, and then you get the inner HTML. That's another way of how to basically escape all of the dangerous tags out into just plain text. But anyway, again, that was all one mini security parentheses that is good to be aware of, but don't worry about it too much because we're not actually learning about all that right now. We're just trying to learn about what we're learning about, which is objects inside of arrays, looping through those arrays, getting into each and every one of those objects, and taking the values that are inside of those objects and creating HTML out of it. So let me quickly just have a look at the chat and see if anyone has some important questions or anything good to notice at this point. Okay. Oh, thanks for reminding me whether anyone is in the waiting room. I don't see anyone, so thanks for reminding me about that. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Okay, so I really hope this part over here is clear enough with you guys about regular variables and then cool, fancier variables such as arrays. Arrays are a type of variable that can have a lot of things inside of them. Number 0, number 1, number 2, and number 3. Then there's this other fancy variable called an object. An object is not like a regular variable that it just has one thing inside of it, like a number or a string, but it could have in it multiple different variables inside of the variable, each one with a name, image, title, link, anything you want to call it. And how you create such an object and how you can get the stuff out of the object, how you can change the stuff that's inside the object. And then you can have an array that contains inside of it multiple objects, and how you can get through the array one by one, and for each and every one, do something with each object that's inside of that array. This is very important stuff to be playing around with and exercising with, so you guys get very, very fluent with looping, with arrays, with objects, and how you combine all those concepts together to get some real, good work done, so to speak, to get some real effects that you can achieve with information, with data that you're going to be working with in your projects. So that is some very important stuff for you guys to be playing around with and getting familiar with. Let's go back to freecodecamp.org and see if I can find another important topic to be dwelling on a little bit, so that we can brush off with our not just HTML, CSS, also some JavaScript, at least enough to work with, so that maybe, just maybe, in this upcoming week, this last week, we could actually cover a little bit of what we kind of missed out on, or we'll actually have a little bit of a peek of it, so that we can know where to go from there and what we could be progressing with our knowledge about. So let's see, what else do we have here that is good to know about? Functions, hopefully we learned and we are well familiar with. Boolean, comparison, if statements and else statements, switch statements. I don't think we covered the switch statement, but I'll leave that up to you guys. It's not that important. It's kind of a shortcut of a little bit of the if and else statements. Counting cards, that sounds interesting. In the casino game blackjack, a player can gain an advantage over the house by keeping track of the relative number of high and low cards remaining in the deck. This is called card counting. Having more high cards remaining in the deck favors the player. Each card is assigned a value according to the table below. When the count is positive, the player should bet high. When the count is 0 or negative, the player should bet low. I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not very familiar with this particular game, so I'm not catching on very easily as to what the challenge is here and what. But if any of you guys know what this is about and you hop why this is interesting and fun, this would be a very, very good exercise for you guys to play around with. Is if you guys could figure out how to. Yeah, how to solve this particular issue. I'm not really hopping what it's about. You'll write a card counting function. It will receive a card parameter, which can be a number or a string, and increment or decrement the global count variable according to the card's value. Function will then return a string with the current count, and a string bet if the count is positive, or hold if the count is 0 or negative. Current count and the player's decision bet or hold should be separated by a single space. Example, -3 hold, 5 bet. Okay, yeah, I'll leave this up to you guys. It sounds like a perfect example. The reason why they have this tutorial at this point in the game is at this point in the tutorials is because it's a very good exercise to test around your skills with about this. So that, for example, if you get card 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then your function should keep track of all that, and at the end it should say, yeah, we got 5, so you should bet. But if it got 7, 8, 9, then it should return 0, and it should recommend that you hold, etc., etc. So that it has this effect of like as if you're following this game in the casino, and as if you're keeping track. Oh, there was a 3, there was a 7, there was a Q, there was an 8, and an A. Okay, so that means -1. Yeah, so we should hold. We shouldn't bet. Etc., etc. So this is a very good exercise. Definitely would recommend you guys jump in and try to do that. And it starts teaching about objects, which is a variable that contains variables inside of it. Adding more stuff into the object. I don't believe I covered that actually. When you guys create an object over here, Like if we do var deal equals this thing here, and this thing here has multiple different values, like val1 is this, val2 is that, is the other, right? So now you have deal, and deal has, it has val1, it has, oops, it has val2, right? But is that it? Is that all there is to deal? Deal only has the stuff in it that we created with it to begin with, and that's all that deal can have. What if I want to add something into it later? Maybe you're keeping track of something and you have to add a new variable into the deal object. Maybe now it has a price. Maybe now it has a color. Maybe now it has a date of when it was retrieved, or who knows what. So the way you can add stuff into an object is by doing something like this. Deal new variable equals 7. And that's it. Now it's as if you created to begin with. It's as if you did new variable and you gave it 7, but you didn't do that, right? We didn't do that to begin with. It wasn't there to begin with, so it didn't have that at first. But now you added a new thing in there, as if now the object does have that in there, and it will actually have it. And you can access it in the same way. You can do dot new variable, or you can do deal square brackets new variable. Same thing as all the rest of the variables. You can also remove something from within an object. You can use the delete operator, the delete command. Delete deal dot val1. When you do that, it's as if val1 was just removed. It disappeared from the deal. It doesn't exist anymore. It used to be there, and now we removed it. That is done with the words delete. So beforehand, if I did something like alert deal val1, it would actually show whatever was inside val1, which is like 9, 4, 7, 8. Afterwards, if I try to alert what's inside of deal val1, I would get undefined because that thing does not exist anymore in the object. Right? So you can add stuff inside of objects and you can remove things out of objects. And yeah, it's very cool to be working with objects. Okay, next. So let's scroll down a little bit further here. Manipulating complex objects, nested objects. What does it mean by complex objects? Sometimes you may want to store data in flexible data structure. A JavaScript object is one way to handle flexible data. They allow for arbitrary combinations of strings, numbers, booleans, arrays, functions, and objects. Okay, you know what? This is actually a useful thing to understand, is not actually what he's talking about here, but this other thing, which is that a function, in a way, is a variable. And this could be a little bit confusing, so let's spend a little bit of time on this because it's actually important. So let me just, for practice, let me just open up another file over here just to mess around with some JavaScript. So we learned that you can create a variable and you can put a number inside of it. You can create a variable and put a string inside of it. You can create a Boolean. We learned you could create an array that has inside of it a bunch of other stuff. We learned you could create a variable that has labeled stuff in it. It's an object that has this thing and that thing. Okay, so these are all the different kinds of variables that we learned about. They have data inside of them, right? X has 10 inside of it. Y has this string inside of it. A has multiple things inside of it. At 0, it has 3, 4, 5. At 1, it has this string. B has multiple variables, each one with its own name. You can call B this thing, B that thing. But then what's interesting is when you guys remember when we created functions, we also created them as if they were variables. We said var my function equals function, open closing parentheses, and open and closing braces. And you might have some parameters that you pass into here. Pass this in, pass that in. And here we can do a bunch of stuff with them, whatever it is that this function is doing. And then in the end, you could return something. Maybe you can return a number, or you can return a variable, or you can return something that you passed in, whatever it is that this function might be doing. And then the way we call this function is by saying my function and with the two parentheses, and you can pass in something like 120 and then 444. And this 120 is going to become this variable, pass this in, and 444 is going to become pass that in. So what's interesting is that my function is actually a variable. It's kind of interesting and a little strange, but my function is a variable. So on the one hand, it's a list of instructions to do. That's what a function is. A function is a list of instructions for the computer to do. Do this, then do that, then do the other, and when you're finished, go back to where you came from. That's what a function is. It's kind of like JavaScript coding itself. When you create a program in JavaScript, you tell them, execute this command, then execute the next command, and then execute the next command, etc., etc. So the same thing, a function. A function doesn't execute right away. When you call it, then it jumps into that list of instructions and it starts doing them one by one. But interestingly, my function is a variable itself. You can take it as a variable and pass it around. So for example, I could take my function and say var x1 equals my function. And now you can also call x1 as if it was a function, because you created a variable. And what did you put? Well, what's a variable? A variable is a box. A variable is like a container box that you put something inside of it. You can put inside of it a string, a number, a Boolean, an array of multiple different containers, or an object of multiple different containers. And you can put inside of it even a list of instructions for the computer to do. So here we created a variable x1. It could have been a number. It could have been other stuff. But instead, this time, we put inside of it a function. So now x1 is a variable that when you ask the programming language, what's inside of you? What does this variable signify? Does it have a number? Does it yield a value? So as it turns out, it yields a function. I am a list of instructions for the computer to do. When you invoke me, when you call me, I'm going to run to that list of functions, list of things to do, and I'm going to execute them. So that's interesting because you can use it as if it's a variable in a way. How so? Let's say, for example, I'm creating an object over here. Var my object. So how do we create an object, if anyone remembers? What symbol am I supposed to use here to create an object? Any takers, any suggestions? How do we create an object? It's not a number variable. It's not a string. It's not an array. How do we make an object? Thank you, Avremel. Yes, we type it with the opening and closing squiggly brackets, the curly braces, as it's called. Okay, and inside of that, we can start putting in variables like this and that and the other, etc. Each one of them separated by a comma. And each of them has to have a value. So I'm going to give this guy 1, 2, 3, this guy 4, 5, 6, and this guy 7, 8, 9. Now I can make also a variable here who's like something. And his value is a function. Strange, isn't it? Do one thing, do another thing, do another thing, return something. So now it's interesting. If I want to call this function something, something is a variable that's inside of my object. So when I wanted to, let's say, use the df variable, I did my object dot df. And then I got the number that's inside there. I could multiply it, I can add it to something else, etc., etc. I could alert it, all the things that you can do with a number variable. If I do want to call the something function, any suggestions? How do I type it out here to go inside of the my object and invoke the something function? So again, if I wanted to mess around with a df variable, I do my object dot df, or I can do my object with square brackets, quotes, df. How do I do if I want to get my object's something function? So my object, what do I do to get the something function? I already got the df, okay? I have the df over here. He gave me the number 1, 2, 3. That's what was inside of him. I could make another variable like x2 equals my object df times 12, and that's going to be just as if I said 123 times 12, because that's what the df variable inside of the object does. Now, how do I get the something function out of the object? Okay, so Avremel suggests we do my object dot something. So my object dot something is a function. I get back a function variable. Hey, here's a function that if you want, one day you could actually invoke, you can actually call it, you can actually execute it. What do I do if I really want to go into my object and actually run it, actually run the something function? Not just get the function like, oh, here's a function, here, take it, hold it, do something with it. What can I do to actually invoke it? Very good. I can do my object dot something with opening and closing parentheses. So it's very interesting. My object is an object that has inside of it one variable, another variable, and a function. So if I want to mess around with the variables, I use it in the usual way that you use variables. And if I want to invoke a function that it has inside of it, I do it the same way as I call functions. I do my object, go inside of the my object thing, and get this function over here and actually call it. And if I want to pass something inside of it, I can pass something inside of it. And this is actually what I was showing you guys with when we were doing console log. You guys remember we were doing console log, and what this does is it shows you something in the console of the browser, right? If I do F12 to open up the developer tools, and I go to the console tab. So for a long time, we were doing alert to show us something, and that always shows a pop-up, and the pop-up is in the page, and you have to click OK, and that's how it does its thing. That's how it shows a message. Another more kind of technical way how to show a message or to test displaying something that you could see text is by doing console.log, if you guys remember. And then in this log over here, you can put in a string like, hello, what's up? And instead of showing a pop-up of alert, this is going to show some text in the console itself where you're developing, where you're writing code. And when you open up this, developer tools over here and you open the console tag, that's where you're going to see it. So let's press enter and see if it does that. And yes, indeed, it showed a message, hello, what's up, in the console right here. So it's interesting. By alert, we just said alert. We call the function alert, as if the function alert is already here, it already exists, it's already available. All you got to do is just call it by name. Anytime you call alert, it's going to do this pop-up alert thing. But console log, I can't just do log. I'm going to get an error, uncaught reference error. Log is not defined. There's no such thing as log. You have to do console dot log. And then you can call this function that actually shows a message in the console. What is that all about? How come by alert, I just write the alert? But by console log, I have to type console.log. What's the difference over there? The difference is that alert is just a plain old function. Like if you created a function out here, just my function, then you just call it my function. That's it. That's all it is. It's a function that belongs out in the open, or as it's known as, it's a global variable. It's a variable that exists globally, that anyone can call it by name, and they just get it right away. It's right there to be used. Whereas console log is a special object that exists in your browser. There's an object called console. Let's examine that object. I'm typing the word console, and I'm pressing enter. And here in the console, we're actually seeing, here, open it up, click on the little arrow, and we see this console object has a whole lot of stuff inside of it. It's one of these internal browser things that's inside of the browser that already comes packaged with to begin with. It has a whole bunch of different functions, apparently. It has a function called assert, clear, context, count, reset, debug, blah, 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 a whole bunch of different things, which if you ever want to look up, it's as simple as Googling MDN console and looking up some of the documentation on that. The console object, see, so console is an object. It's not just something that you can just call a function out in the open. You have to go inside of this object, and in that object, you get all the different functions that it has. The console object provides access to the browser's debugging console. For example, the web console in Firefox. The specifics of how it works varies from browser to browser, but there is a de facto set of features that are typically provided. Console object can be accessed from any global object, window on browsing scopes, and worker global scope as specific variants in worker via the worker console, via the property console. It's exposed as window.console and can be referenced as simply console. For example, console.log. So yeah, console is a object that already exists in your browser. It's already there. You can already use it. You didn't have to go through the bother of creating this whole console object. The browser makers already created it already for you, and you can just go ahead and make use of it. And we were using this particular function right over here, console.log. Why is that? How does that work? Because just like we wrote in our code, when we created my object was an actual variable. You have to call it by name. You have to say my object, and then you can go inside of it and get whatever stuff is inside of it. You can get its df variable, you can get the other variable, and you can get its something function, which is similar to the console that has its log function. So just like we did console log, this is similar to what we did over here, my object dot something. We called the something function that was actually a variable inside of the my object object that we created. We actually are not going to break today. We're going to go straight through till the end of the class today. That's just how it worked out due to technicalities today. So having said that, we also now understand a little bit more what we're doing with jQuery as well. jQuery, we called a function over here, and then right away on the function we said dot append. What does that mean over here, dot append? How does that work exactly? What if I want to be as cool as jQuery? What if I want to make also, since I'm such a good programmer, I want to make also something that you call with a dollar symbol, and then you can do dot append on it. How can I create that myself? How do I do like what jQuery did? So it's actually as simple as this. Create an object called dollar symbol and make it equals to an object. And inside of this object, you could have whatever you want. You can create all your different properties that you want, with whatever values you want them to have. And you can make them have various functions as well. I'm going to make a function called append. Okay, you'll be a function which takes in, let's say, one parameter, and it does a bunch of things, and it does a bunch of other things. Maybe it makes another variable, and it adds it to the value of param times 10, or who knows, whatever it is you might be doing. Maybe it's doing a for loop. It's looping through some indexes and performing some magic on them, and whatever it is that you might find it important to be doing inside of your append function. And then maybe it has some if statements just for good measure. Why not, for fun? And finally, maybe you have a return statement, right? All of this code over here is inside of this append function right over here. And the way how you're going to use that is you're going to say, hey, dollar symbol, go inside of you and get the append function. So actually, this is a little different than the jQuery thing. The jQuery thing, the dollar symbol is a function itself. The function actually gives you an object on which you can call the function. So that's maybe a little bit more like this. You can create a function called dollar. And in here, I am a function just like jQuery, because I'm cool like that. Okay, now what does this function do? This is interesting. This function can return an object. And inside of this object is a property called append. And this property called append gives you a function. See, all of these concepts that we're learning about in programming, they're all very dynamically combinable. You can combine different concepts of these things together for very interesting, cool effects. First, we learned individually about what's a variable, what's a number variable, what's a string variable, what's an array, what's an object, and then we started combining them a little bit. What happens if you put an array inside of an array? What happens if you have an object inside of an array? What if you have an array full of objects? What if you make a variable kind of function? What if you call a function and you get back an object? What if that object has a function inside of itself? So you guys will be practicing with this little by little, more by more, how you will find useful ways how to create, starting from simple, obviously. Don't run ahead of yourself too much. You don't have to go, 13 levels deep to make sure you know everything. Just practice little by little, slowly but surely, one thing by one thing. Create a variable, create an array, create an object, then be so daring as to try to create an object of objects. Then try to create an array of arrays. Then try to create an array of objects. Then try looping through it. Then try adding another object inside of every object inside of a loop. Then call a function that does the loop for you and then put stuff inside of the array, etc., etc. Over here, you can now call this dollar symbol, pass in some information into it, which actually is going to go here. So we have to pass some variable inside of there. And then it's going to give you back as if you had an object that has a whole bunch of stuff inside of it. And we know that once you have an object, similar to when we had my object, you can get the stuff that's inside of it either this way or by using the dot symbol that way. And that's what we want to do here. I got an object out of here. I want to immediately call its something function, either by using the square brackets with a string or by using the dot. And if you had a function called append, then you can call that append function over here. You called a function called dollar symbol. You got something out of it, which was the result of getting that function gave you an object. Now you can immediately do something with that object. Oh, I got an object. I don't want to waste any time. I want to immediately call a function on that object. Right away, put a period right after you got the object and call the append function and put something inside of that. And this will become more and more apparent as you go along. So don't worry too much if you didn't catch all of that. But as you're going to go along doing more jQuery like this, and you're wondering, how does this actually work? What does it mean when I'm calling dollar symbol and I'm passing in a string, and then I'm doing a dot, and then I'm calling the append function on it? I know it's a function because I see it has an opening parentheses and has a closing parentheses. And inside of that, I'm passing into it some huge parameter over here. Doesn't matter how big it is or how short it is or how long or how small. The point of the matter is, I'm passing something into a function, or I can tell that because there's a word and there's an opening parentheses and closing parentheses. That means I'm calling a function. And yes, that is what it is. And as you'll see, as you're learning, as you're going along, you'll find it more and more familiar, the concept that, I get it now. Here I'm calling a function. I'm getting an object out of that function. And then I'm immediately calling another function inside of that object, which happens to be an append function, which in this case does putting HTML inside of a page, as we saw in the documentation, which you can always Google, jQuery add HTML into page. And you will right away find the append function or the .html function. And you'll look through the documentation, we'll see how it goes, which again, to begin with, don't even necessarily try to understand everything of how it works or why it works. Just try to do it and see what works. And then you'll start understanding, oh, when I do this, this happens. When I do that, that happens. Like if I have a bunch of HTML over here and I do this thing to it, that's interesting. Suddenly I see this p tag over here that I had inside of my string, like the one that we tried constructing over here, that one suddenly is showing up inside of the HTML. Cool. Before that p tag wasn't there and now it's there. So you'll see as you go more and more of these functions that you're learning out of jQuery, how to make cool stuff happen inside of your page. So let's go back to our list of JavaScript concepts here. We have loops. Profile lookup, that sounds interesting. We have an array of objects representing different people in our contact list. This looks very much like our deals, right? I had an array of deals. It's an array because it has square brackets over here. That's how we know it's going to have elements 0 and 1 and 2 and 3, etc. And what are those elements? The first one is an object. The second one is an object. The third one is an object. And what are inside of those objects? Well, they have specifics. They have an image and a title and a link. Same thing we can see as this exercise over here. This one is called contacts. And it's also an array because it has a square bracket over here. Okay, so we're going to have an array of multiple variables inside of it. What's the first variable? What's the second variable? What's the third variable? Well, each one of them seems to be an object. Oh, this is interesting. It could have been much simpler, like an array of just numbers, one number and another number and another number. Or it would have been much simpler if it was a string and another string. But in this case, it looks like inside of our array are a bunch of objects, one after another. Okay, so let's go deeper now. What is inside of each of the objects that are inside the array? Well, each one of them seems to have a first name, a last name, a number, and another level deeper even. It has an array of what are the things that this person likes. Like this person likes, inside of its array, it likes pizza, it likes coding, it likes brownie points. And that's all for the first object inside of our array. Similar to how we had deals. Deals inside of array, we have the first one, the second one, the third one. Inside of each one, there are properties. It has its image, it has its title, it has its link. And the truth of the matter is, you can make it more complicated. Here's the complex stuff inside of here that has another object inside of an object. It's probably missing a comma over here. So let me add that comma. And now the error went away. And now inside of here, you can go even deeper. And you can say, here I have an array. An array has, something and then something else. And then maybe it has another array inside of that. And you can go more and more levels deep with this. There's no limit, really, to how deep you can go. And then you could say I have something else. And that's maybe a function. So here we have a very interesting deal that has an image, it has a title, it has a link, and it has a complex object inside of it. Inside of that object, we have something called deeper, which has even more things inside of it, an array of multiple stuff in it. And it also has a function called something else. This is more or less where you can go with things when you're creating variables in JavaScript. We went from the most simple, var x equals 10, all the way up to learning about arrays, and then objects inside of arrays, inside of objects, inside of arrays with functions and all sorts of good stuff. So now let's see what this task inside of the project over here wanted us to do. We have an array of objects representing different people in our context list, right? So the first person over here, this is the first person. It starts with the beginning brace and it closes with the ending brace. That's what makes it an object. An object starts here, ends there. And then there's the next person. So the first person's name is Akira Lane with this phone number and these likes. The second person is Harry Potter with this number and this likes. And the third person is Sherlock Holmes, etc., etc. So now, a lookup profile function that takes name and the property as an argument and has been pre-written. A lookup profile function that takes name and a property prop as arguments has been pre-written for you. So we actually have a function already written here. Oh, he only made the shell of the function. He didn't actually write the code that does the stuff. So he prepared for us an empty lookup profile function that takes some parameters over here. As you guys remember, when you call a function, you can make that function take along with it something for the way. So here, for example, we're passing in Akira likes. And he's going to take in name and property. We can send in something else instead. We can send in Harry, and we can say number, right? But instead, in this case, he said Akira and likes, That goes in as the name, as the property. And what is our mission? What are we supposed to do with this? What should we code inside of this function so that it magically does it for us? The function should check if name is an actual contact's first name, and the given property is a property of that contact. So what that means is, if I pass in Akira and I pass in likes, first thing that our function needs to do, it needs to go to this array that we have, this array of contacts. It needs to go through each and every one of them and check whether indeed they have a name and they have something called likes. Check if there is one with a name called Akira, which will be correct in this case, and check if that contact in the list of contacts, in the array of contacts, check if he has something called likes, which in this case he does have. This will result in false, for example, if we said likes with a lot of S's, because the object that has Akira inside of it does not have something called likes with a lot of S's. It does have something with a single S, though. So this will be false. But if we take away all those S's, this will be correct, because we do have something that has Akira and it has likes. But what is that code? We have to type up this code that's actually going to do this. You can see how this is going to be an interesting exercise, how we have to loop through the contacts array, and we have to look through each one and check, is its first name matching to Akira? And if yes, does it have a variable inside of it called likes? That's what our task at hand is to do here. If both are true, if you find that there's a record that has the first name that was given and the property name that we asked for, then return the value of that property. So then return the value of whatever was asked for. In this case, likes was asked for, so you have to return the value of likes, which happens to be the value of this array, pizza, coding, brownie points. So it's kind of like this function over here is like a lookup thing for us saying, hey, find me a contact with first name Akira and please give me their something. In this case, it's give me their likes. We can also say, hey, please look up something called Harry and give me his number. And in either case, this function should correctly work. It should go into all of the contacts. It should find if there's one whose first name is Harry. And if it does exist, give me his, whatever the property is. It could be likes, it could be number, it could be last name. In this case, it's, oh, give me its number. Okay, let's find the one that has Harry, and let's give him the number, right? It was different than before. Before we said, don't give me his number, give me his likes. Then it wouldn't have given us the number, or would have had to give us this one. Whichever thing we ask for, give me that thing that's inside of that contact. If name does not correspond to any contacts, then return no such contacts, okay? If we looped through the whole array of contacts and we didn't find anyone with a name, you know, maybe I'm looking for blah, 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 then we should have an error message saying no such contact. We don't have someone with this first name. And finally, if prop does not correspond to any valid properties of a contact found to match the name, then return no such property. If I'm asking, give me Harry's age, and he goes into the contacts array and it looks for, is this Harry? No, this is not Harry. Is this Harry? Yes, this is Harry. Okay, let's find his age. Let's see, age. Oh, there's no age. Then in that case, you should return the error, no such property. So how are we going to implement this function? What are we going to write up over here to make so that we loop through this array of contacts and we find if there's someone with this first name and get the property that we're looking for? So let's try to do this as interactively as we can. This will be another good exercise to try and practice these concepts. Let me quickly look through the chat and see if anyone was asking some things. Let's see. Yes, indeed. I'm not going to leave you guys with an open mouth, but we'll walk you guys through the answer, because hopefully, you know what would have been great is if all of you guys voted boring. We already did this last time with the deals We already went through this. We did through the loop. We went through how to get each item's index. We already went through how to get the, all the variables. So why are we doing this again? Boring. Let's do something else. That would have been cool because that means you guys are very familiar already. You practice your own looping. You practice going through objects, going through arrays. And that would be great if we could move on to other stuff. But this is so fundamental. This is very, very, very important that, again, I really highly recommend you guys do these exercises on your own. If you really want to get into programming, this is where it's at. This is the meat and potatoes of how you guys are going to figure out how to build your web page, how to put the information in there, how to make your beautiful HTML with all the stuff that it needs to have in there. So let's do this a little bit interactive. What do you guys suggest I start doing here to go through all of these contacts one by one and start looking for this parameter that was passed in, which is name, and see if any of them have the name? Let's see, any suggestions? Go ahead, guys. How do I start? What do I start typing over here in order to, okay, very good. Nachman Engel is suggesting we start doing a for loop. So he wrote it in short form, but I'll do the courtesy of filling in the long form. And here we go. For loop with the opening and closing parentheses, with the 3 segments of semicolons. And now we're going to start setting up our counter variable. By the way, just a little word on code cleanliness and code clarity. It's very important to practice as best as you guys can to, what's it called? To space out your coding correctly. Like we learned about with HTML, that whatever is inside of something that is inside of something else, space them all out on another line further deeper in. Same thing over here. The function is kind of like at the ground floor over here. It starts at this level and it ends at this level. If I write this for loop over here at the same exact line, at the same exact level as the function was written, it's going to seem a little bit confusing. Whereas if I tab this in by one tab, now it becomes a little bit more clear. Ah, I see what's happening here. This, hang on, let me tab this in as well and this in as well. Okay, this here is a function. Everything else that's going on here is inside of that function. Before it wasn't so clear. It's like, oh, it looks like this is just a bunch of lines of code over here. There's this line of code, and then there's also this line of code. They're both equally the same, it seems. You know, we have to execute this line of code, and then we go on to the next one, and then we go on to the next one, because they seem to be just instructions, one after another after another. It's not clear to me whether something is actually part of a function that's not going to be executed now one after another. It's actually inside of it. It's going to happen when we execute going inside of this function. But when we do space it out correctly, your code is a lot more clear. Oh, I see this instantly. I see this right away. It's pleasing on the eyes. It's pretty code, as it's called. A programmer is considered a artist and a poet as well, in the sense that you can write very legible, very clean, very like, I can breathe. This is normal looking code and not some other very horrendous looking code that I have seen in my time, which you guys will definitely come across. You'll come across a lot of very horribly written code, which is not ideal, very hard to debug, very hard to read and understand what's inside of what. Where does it begin? Where does it end? Is it all like on the same line? And how do I debug it? And I don't see it on a separate line. It's terrible. I can't work with this. Here, you are spacing things out correctly. It's beautiful code. You can read it. You can understand it very clearly. So very important, as best as you guys can, to format your codes in a nice way when you write up your code. Okay, let's do the basics of creating a counter over here. Let's call it counter this time. We're going to count up from 0, and we're going to go all the way up to, as Menachem suggested, it should be less than the length of contacts. Contacts is the array that has multiple things inside of it. So contacts dot length, and this became a whole lot less legible now because it moved on to the next line. Let me move this aside here. Oh, There we go. A lot more legible. Okay, and finally, we have to count up our counter. Counter plus plus. Okay, so the first time around, counter is going to be 0. The next time around, counter is going to be 1. The next time is going to be 2, etc., etc., etc. So now that I'm going to loop through every object inside of this contacts array, the first time, I want to get this guy. The second time, I want to get this guy. How do I get guy number 0 out of contacts? Okay, so I'm here in the loop. And by the way, as you noticed, I went another level deep inside of the text because now I'm inside of a for loop that's inside of a function. And I want it to be very clear. I don't want it to be confusing that like, oh yeah, here's one line of code with something about for, I don't know what exactly. Oh, and here's some more code, and here's some other code, and then here's a closing brace, and then here's some more code. It's very unclear over here that this is the jurisdiction of the for loop. Here is where it begins, and here is where it ends, and everything inside of the for loop is going to be executed over and over and over again in the loop. It's not clear right now because it's not spaced out correctly. But if I do space it one space further in, now I can see, oh, now it's clear. Everything that's spaced inside of this for loop, all of that is very clear to see. That's what's going to be looping over and over again as many times as we loop through this code. So how do I get an item out of the array? We have an array called contacts, right? That's this array on top over here. It has element number 0, and it has element number 1, and it has element number 2. So how do I get contacts number 0, which is hopefully going to give me this object over here, the first guy? See some suggestions here. Avremel is running ahead a little bit, but let's take it step by step. Contacts number 0 is by doing contacts and then square brackets with a 0 inside of it. Contacts number 1 is by doing a 1 inside of it, and a 2 inside of it, and a 3 inside of it. And in this case, instead of putting a number 0 and a number 1 and number 2 and number 3, instead of that, we're going to be putting a variable, because in programming, it's so cool. You don't even have to write an explicit number. You can write a variable, and it's each time going to be magically the number that you want it to be, whatever it is that it needs to be. In our case, we made a counter for that purpose. So if we want it to be 0 at first, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3, we can use conveniently that variable that we created for ourselves, counter. The first time around, this is going to be just like we typed contacts number 0. The second time around, it's going to be like contacts number 1, etc., etc. Because counter keeps counting up, as we said over here, from 0 go to 1, go to 2, go to 3, go to 4, as long as it's less than the length of how many items are inside of the contacts array. So we have contacts counter. Okay, that's going to give us this item over here, this contact, whose first name is Akira and last name is Lane, etc. That's the first one that we have. Okay, the second time around, it's going to give us this guy. But for each guy that it is, right, for whichever one that it is, what do we want to do now in order to fulfill our task? Our task is the function should check if name is an actual contact's first name, and the given property is a property of that contact. So in other words, in English, if this guy has that first name, or if this guy has that first name, or if the next guy has that first, check each one of the contacts and see if that first name matches. In that case, see if he has the prop parameter as an item in the object. So let's take the first part, not everything at once, slowly but surely, one by one. The first thing that we have to do is we have to ask if the name that was passed into the function, if it matches the first name in the object. So when I call the function with Harry, I need to check to see, is this first name matching Harry? Is this first name matching Harry? Is this first name matching Harry? You have to check against each one, which we're already doing over here because we're looping inside of the array, and checking each one to see whether its first name matches what was passed in. What was passed into the function? A variable called name. I have to match up with name and see, does his value of his first name match the name that was passed in? Today I passed in Harry. Another day I can pass in Akira. Whatever one that was passed in over here, they're both going to be called name at this point. It's as if we created a variable var name equals Akira, or var name equals Harry, except that it happens magically every time you call the function and you pass in something as the first parameter. This is the first one from the first comma, and that's going to be the first one, the first comma coming into the function. So what can I do here to ask in JavaScript, please JavaScript check for me whether this object that we got over here, does its first name have the parameter name that we passed into the function? What is the if statement that we have to do here? If something, what can I check over here to see if his first name matches the name that was passed in? If this variable matches this variable inside of that object. Very good question, Menachem Mendel Engel. What if we have more than one Harry? That is a very good question. Let's actually simulate that. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it. So now we have two Harrys, this Harry and this Harry. Just to be sure, I'm going to change his last name to Harry Goldstein, and we'll change his phone number to a bunch of zeros, and he likes to babble a lot. Okay, so we have two Harrys. Good question. What's going to happen if we have two different Harrys and he's looking for Harry? So why don't we, the best way to know is how about we just step through it step by step and see what's going to happen. In fact, best would be if you can imagine in your own mind what is going to happen over here. After all, the computer is going to fulfill our instructions. We're telling it what to do, right? We're telling it loop through this. Now loop through this. Now loop through this. And each time you loop through this, go inside and check whether his first name matches. You might end up realizing, I see what he's going to do, and I know what he's going to do. He's going to do this and then this, exactly as we told him to do it. And then that's what's going to happen. So let's find out, actually. And in fact, you can control that. You can change. You can make that it behaves in one way or it behaves in another way. You can make so that it says, hey, wait a minute, I found two entries that have Harry. Maybe you want this one, or do you want the other one? Or you could make it do just get me the first one and that's it. Ignore the second one. Or you could make it do both of them. Do the first Harry and then do also the second Harry. You can control that yourself. You can change the destiny of whatever you want your code to do. You can make that happen yourself. The only question is, how does that work? How do I actually do that? So that's what we're learning right now. We know how to get the object out of the array. And now we have to ask a question about it, which Avremel already gave away several moments ago. And I see Menachem is also typing for us over here. If context counter first name equals the name. So this is very cool because it might actually be correct. But what I'm wondering is how many of you guys, by show of hands, how many of you guys understand this? I'm really hoping you guys are following and are actually learning the lessons and the skills over here so that you guys know how to do this programming thing. So let's explain it a little bit so we make sure we know what's going on over here. Equals name. All right, so let's explain what's happening over here. When we say the word contacts, so step by step over here, contacts gives us an array. In that array is a whole bunch of stuff, actually. It's all the stuff that was up here. You see, contacts is a variable whose contents is an array of a bunch of different stuff. So when we say the word contacts, we get an array of stuff. If we want to get one single stuff out of the contacts, that's what we did by doing the counter. I'm getting element number 0, getting element number 1, right? So in this case, I'm getting element number whichever counter is holding at. So contacts gives me Let's just document this so we know what we're talking about. This gives us an array with a bunch of stuff inside of it. This gives us the object that's at that position in the array. Context element number 0 is an object that starts with a curly brace and ends with a curly brace. So let's signify that by noting this over here. We get an object with some stuff inside of it. In fact, if you want to be more specific, when we say contacts, then we get an array that has in it a bunch of objects. And when we say contacts, one specific one out of them, then I get only one of them. The entire array has multiple objects. One object, another object, another object. But one specific one is like picking this one out of it, or picking just this one out of it. Whatever the number is that counter is holding at, if it's element 0, it's going to get us this one. If it's element 1, it's going to get us this one. Whichever that one is being picked out over here by saying contacts with the counter. Now we have an object. Inside of that object is multiple different variables. We have a first name variable, a last name variable, a number variable, and a likes variable. Or as it's called in an object, it's called a property. First name property, last name property, number property, and likes property. So how do I get one of those things out of the object? We learned already we could use either the dot notation or the square brackets notation. So by saying contacts counter dot first name, then we are getting Harry or Akira or who knows, whatever it is that it is. You could either do this using the dot notation or you can do with the square brackets notation. Like this. How is that possible? Again, because when we said contacts counter, we got an object. This is how you get stuff out of an object. You do dot first name or square brackets first name. So now it's like I have a string. So this over here, this whole long, complicated looking thing over here, at the end of the day, all that it ends up amounting to is a string. That's all that it ends up doing. Which string? Well, because we're getting this specific object out of this specific array, out of this specific thing, then it gives us Akira in one case, or it's going to give us Harry in another case. That's why we have objects inside of arrays, because we want to have multiple different persons, right? We have multiple different contacts. The first contact, he has this name, that name, the other number, but the second contact should have a different name, shouldn't be the same person all over again. So by going inside of that specific element, inside of the array, and then going to that specific part of that element, going to its first name or to its last name or to whatever it is, we get that one individual variable out of it. At the end of the day in JavaScript, everything boils down to these basic variables that we learned about in the beginning. At the end of the day, when you go inside of an array, inside of a function, inside of an object, and you go inside of this, inside of that, at the end, at the bottom of it, you're always going to end up with something like a string. It's always going to be either some text in a string, or it's going to be a number, or it's going to be a number with fractions, or it's going to be a Boolean, or possibly something else I'm not remembering at this time. Can't remember if there's something else. But at the end of the day, those are the values that it ends up with. All the rest are just containers to hold these pieces of information. All, you know, in an object, you can have multiple numbers and strings, and that's it. That's the base data that you're reaching at the end of the day. In an array, yeah, in an array, again, you can hold multiple different numbers, multiple different strings. At the end of the day, though, it always comes down to pieces of information, pieces of data, a number, a string, stuff like that. So inside of our array, inside of our objects, at the end of the day, we have a string, a first name, a last name, a number, and then some individual strings of what this person's likes are. So now we're taking that string that's deep, deep inside of this object, inside of this array, and we're comparing it with name. What is name? Name is that parameter over here that was passed into the function. When we created this function, we said, anytime someone calls this function, they could be giving you something to take with you for the way. One day it's going to be something like Akira. Another day it's going to be something like Harry. Right? And whatever it is that they pass into this function on that particular time, that particular day, that's what that string is going to be. Name is going to contain whatever it is that was passed in. It happens to be, in this case, the first time we called it, we passed in Harry. So right now, name is equals to the string Harry. So in this case, we're kind of comparing whether Harry is equals to Harry. And if that's correct, then this amounts to true. We did a logical comparison over here to ask whether this is true or whether this is false. And the result is that Harry is equals to Harry. They do match. They are the same. As such, this results in true. And when an if statement results in true, we actually execute what is inside of the if braces. And if it's not true, if we had an else statement, then we would do whatever was inside of that else. But in this case, I don't think we had an else statement. We just had for now an if. And we're comparing whether the name that we passed into this function, whether it matches the first name of this object that we're looping through right now. So let's simulate this in our mind. The first time around, this is going to be 0. We're going to get context number 0. Who is context number 0? This one over here, Akira Lane with this number and these likes. Okay, so we have Akira. Now we're getting its first name. Is that first name matching to name? Well, what is name? In this case, name was passed in as Harry. Does Harry match Akira? False. That is not correct. In that case, we're going to skip over whatever was inside the function and not do whatever is inside the if statement and not do what was inside of it. The second time around, when we passed in Akira, oh no, forget about that. We're still going in the first time. In the first time, when we're still looking for Harry, we're looping over here. At first, counter was 0. Now counter is going to be 1. When we get context counter, which is like saying context number 1, that gives us the second guy in the list, this one. And we're going to ask the same question again. That guy that we got at that position out of the array, what is his first name? Does it match? Does it equals to name? Well, we passed in Harry, and we're checking whether Harry is equals to what the second guy's first name is. What's the second guy's first name? Harry. In that case, we're checking whether Harry is matching to Harry, and that would be true. So now we have a piece of logic that goes inside of our list of contexts, one by one by one, and for each one, it asks a legitimate question: is your name matching over here? And if it's correct, then we can execute some special code for that. And it's magic. Anytime it matches correctly, it's going to do this stuff. Otherwise, it's going to do other stuff. It's going to skip this. So we have a cool way of how to find something specific that we want to find, and only in that case, do something special with it, which otherwise we wouldn't do in other cases. So now, going back to our assignment, what do we have to do at this point that we created a nice if statement to do inside of our loop, going through each and every one of the contexts that we're looping through? Let's see if anyone posted anything important in the chat. We have a good few suggestions about how to find and match and check to see if they have the property inside of them. Very good. If name is an actual context first name, and the given property prop is a property of that context. So listen to this English, because if we understand this English clearly, we can also understand what we should be typing in JavaScript. The function should check if name is an actual context first name, and pay attention to the and. Okay, we're asking a first question. We're asking if a first question is true, and we're also combining that with another question. Do any of you guys remember when I do an if statement, how do I ask if something is true and then also if something else is true? Like, let's say we want to ask if someone's last name is Goldstein and if his age is greater than 18. How do we do and in an if statement? If you guys remember what we learned with all the operators, here we need to check if name is an actual contact's first name, and the second question we need to ask is, and the given property, prop, is a property of that contact. We need to ask both of these questions. And if both of these questions are true, then we have to do this thing. If they're not true, then we have to do other things. So let's try to ask both of these questions in the if statement in JavaScript. We ask the first question if the first name matches. Now, how do I do the and thing? Some people were suggesting the two pipe symbols. As it turns out, the two pipe symbols is the or. This is asking whether something is true, or if it's not true, try to see if something else is true. That's the or operator. But yes, correct. Double ampersands, that tells us the and. That tells us if this condition is true, and, which means that's not good enough. If this is true, you're still not done. You still have to go and check if another thing is true. Only then do you have a chance of maybe being fully true, which is different than the or operator. The or operator tells you, check to see if this is true. And if it's true, then we're good. Great. If it's not true, okay, that's not too bad. That's okay. It's okay if this isn't true. Try to see if at least the second thing is true. Maybe we still have a chance. Even though if the first thing was false, but with the or operator, we still have a chance to see if maybe the second thing is true. Only if both of them are not true, if both of them are false, then the or guy gives up. Then the or guy says, sorry, it's false. I tried my best. I tried the first one, it was false. I tried the second one, it was also false. Then we're not going to do what's inside of the if statement. But with the ampersand, then we need both of them to be true. If the first one is true, but the second one is false, we're not going to do it. If the first one is false, the second one is true, we're still not going to do it. If both of them are false, we're for sure not going to do it. Only if both of them are true, the first one is true and the second one is true, then we're going to execute what's inside of the if statement. This is known as a logical Boolean table. You guys can look it up on Google if you want. It shows you how and works. And needs there to be true and true. If it's true and false, it gets false. If it's false and true, then it gets false. If it's false and false, it gets false. If it's true and true, then it gets true. Or works differently. Or has, if it's true and false, it results in true. If it's false and true, it results in true. If it's false and false, then it results in false. If it's true and true, then it for sure results in true. There's all these Boolean logical combination, logical tables of how the comparisons work. So over here we're asking if this matches the name, and also check the second condition. What was the second condition? Let's go back to the description of our project over here. Check if the name is a contact's first name and the given property prop is a property of that contact. Basically, we passed in another parameter into the function, the second one called prop. What are we doing with that one? We already figured out what we did with the name variable. It's as if we made a variable name with the value of Harry, and now we're checking to see whether that variable matches something else, right? We already figured out what happens with the name variable. What happens with the prop variable? What is that supposed to represent? Well, in this case, we passed in the string likes. So we have a string likes, and we want to know whether this object that we're looping through, this guy that we got out of the context list, we want to know if he has something inside of him by the name of likes. So it's a little bit different than when we check the name. When we check the name, we assumed he has a first name. We just went ahead and assumed that. It could be not true. It could be that for some reason someone doesn't even have a first name. And then you're going to get an error if you try to check, what is this object's first name? What first name? He doesn't have a first name. Well, we kind of just silently went ahead and we assumed that. We assumed he has a first name. Okay, so let's let that slide. We're assuming he has a first name, and we're checking to see whether his first name is Akira. But now we're saying something else. Don't check the value that's inside of the variable, right? Don't go to what's inside of it. Actually, go to the first thing. Go to the name of the property. Go to the name of the variable and see if that matches something. So how do you do that? How do you check what's the name of the thing and see if that matches something? How do I check not if his name matches something, but whether if he even has a first name? Or in this case, we're trying to check whether the contact that we got out of the array by this iteration getting the number from the loop, how do we even know if he has a likes property inside of him? What if he has a blah, blah, blah property inside of him? How am I supposed to know whether he has one or whether he doesn't have one? You see how that's different than when we asked the first name. The first name, we just went ahead and said, yeah, give me the first name and tell me if it matches this name. Here we're saying, wait. Before going to see if he has even that thing, let's check. Does he have it or does he not have it? Does he have something blah, blah, or he doesn't have something blah, blah? Or in this case, does he have something called what was passed in for prop? Does he have likes or does he not have likes? So whatever you pass in as a second parameter, we want to take that string that was passed in and check to see, hey, you object over here, do you have something inside of you by the name of this string, which in this case is likes? Do you have something called likes inside of you? So the way to do that, as some people have mentioned already in the chat, yes, good job of Remel again, is we could use a function called hasOnProperty. I want to, at this point, use a slightly simpler version of it. We're not going to use the hasOnProperty. What we're going to do is we're going to ask this property as if it's a question itself, which is a strange thing to do, but let me explain it. So here we're asking two questions. Is the first name of this variable, is it matching the name variable? Yes or no? And if that's true, check another thing, please. Is the likes of this variable? Wait, that seems like a half a phrase. Is the likes what? Do you want to see if it matches something? Do you want to see if it equals some sort of string? What do you want to do with it? No. I'm just asking itself. Is it? So does that make sense or does that not make sense? Well, let's think about it. What we're doing over here is we're getting the value out of that variable, right? Don't forget, when you create a variable x equals 10, and then you call the variable by name x, what you get is what's inside of that variable, 10, right? So don't forget over here, when I say contacts, counter, likes, what I'm getting is the value that's inside of there. The value that's inside of there is an array that has a bunch of stuff inside of it, right? Let's not forget. The likes thing is an array that has a bunch of things inside of it. So when I say in this question over here, contacts, counter, likes, the result of what's coming out of that is an array. And I'm taking an array and I'm asking the array as a question. So what is that? How does that make sense? I thought you want to get an array because you want to get something out of the array. You know, maybe you want to get element 0 or element 1. What does it mean you're asking an array? You're asking it itself. What is that supposed to mean? Well, as it turns out, this is an important concept to understand in JavaScript, which might be a good time to learn about this now. There is something called truthy and falsy. What's the idea of truthy and falsy? Well, we all know about the Boolean variables, like asking, variable asking equals true. In this case, asking is true. Or maybe asking could be false, right? Whatever it is you put inside of this variable, it might be either true or false. But did you know that you can also ask a number, whether it's true or false? And sometimes it's going to be true, and sometimes it's going to be false, except it's not really true and false. Only true is really true, and only false is really false. but you can kind of borrow the idea of truthiness and falsiness also from a number. And you can also borrow this idea of truthiness and falsiness also from a string. And you can also borrow it out of an object and out of an array. And here's how it works. True is obviously true, and false is obviously false. A number is, in JavaScript, considered to be true. That's just a rule of how it is and how it works. When you have a number in JavaScript, if it's a number that's greater than 0, if it's a number 1 or a number 2 or number 3, or if it's a -1 or -2 or -3 or -10 or -1,000,000 or +1,000,000, that will always be considered as if true. Why, you ask? That's what the JavaScript people decided makes sense. If you're asking a number, here's the rules that we're going to make up for that. If it's any number, positive or negative, we're going to consider that to be true. Even though it doesn't make sense, you know, when you ask a question, is this true? That's a sensible question. Yes, this is true. Or is this true? No, this is false. That's a sensible question. But when you ask, is 3, that's not really like a logical, is that true or false? But in JavaScript, they decided to, yeah, you know what? 3 is true. How about that? Even though it logically doesn't make sense, but they just decided that any number above 0 and below 0 is going to be considered truthy. It's not actually true and false, but it's truthy. It's true. So if you ever ask in an if statement, hey, is 43? Yes or no? So again, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but in JavaScript, they decided the answer will be true. If it's a number that's not 0, it's going to be true. And 0 is going to be considered false. Why did they do that? Because it turned out to be convenient sometimes in the programming language. Sometimes you're going to want to read a number variable, and it's just convenient sometimes to ask, if it has 0 inside of it, then I consider that bad, negative. No want that. Therefore, that's going to be like falsy, just because sometimes it's useful to use things that way. Whereas if it has a number, if it has a 1, even a -1, or a -1,000,000 or a +1,000,000, then that's considered true. So anytime you ask a number, you get positive for anything that is an actual number and 0 negative for something that's 0. How about a string? Well, they decided that any string that has stuff inside of it is going to be considered true. Any string, if you ask it as a question, even though it makes no sense, hey, is blah, 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 well, that doesn't make any sense. It's not a question. Ask me whether something is true, or ask me whether something is greater than something, or less than something, or equals something. That's a sensible question. What are you asking me? A string. How does that make any sense? Still, they decided a string is yes. Even if the string is 0, by the way, since it's a string that has stuff inside of it, it's considered yes. If it's an empty string that has nothing inside of it, then they decided that's going to be false. And that's useful because sometimes you want to ask a string, and if it's empty, then you would consider that bad. I don't want that's negative, negatory. So that's going to be considered false. So that's falsy. Whereas if it has even a white space inside of it, if it has something inside of it, even a 0, then that's data, that's information. That's like it has something inside of it. Then we're going to consider that to be true. And finally, what I wanted to get at in our case is that if you ask an object, if you ask a property that it has, if it exists, it's going to give you that variable. And if it doesn't exist, it's going to give you undefined. So if I go into this object and I say, hey, context counter, give me your blah, blah, blah. So let's go into that object. Does he have blah, blah, blah inside of it? No, he doesn't have blah, blah, blah inside of it. In that case, that's going to result in undefined. Whereas if I say, hey, give me your likes, like we set up here. Give me your likes. Does he have a likes? Yeah, he has a likes. It's an array. Okay, so give you the array. So in this case, it's going to give me an array. And in this case, it's going to give me undefined. Well, isn't that convenient? If I ask undefined, undefined is actually going to be considered falsy, bad, negatory. It's going to be false. If I ask an array, well, since an array exists, it's an array, especially if it has stuff inside of it, then that array will be considered good, positive. It has a thing, then it's true. Let's illustrate that a little bit over here with the truthy and falsy thing. If I use undefined, undefined is considered false. If I ever ask whether undefined, I'm going to get false out of that. Such as if I have an object, I'm going just a few minutes over time over here for the bit of time lost at the beginning of the class. And then I say, hey, my object, give me your awesome property. There's just one problem. My object does not have awesome property. That means that the result of saying my object.awesome property is going to be the same as undefined. Undefined is considered falsy. Let's make a little list over here of all the things that were considered falsy. We found that 0 is falsy. We found that empty string is falsy. And now we're finding that undefined is falsy. Let's show all the examples of things that are truthy. Number 1 is truthy. -1 is truthy. Number a million something is truthy. And negative something trillion is truthy. We found that a string with anything inside of it at all is truthy. We found that getting an object out of getting a property out of an object, it's really like getting any other array, any other variable. If it has something inside of it that turns out to be a number or a string or something inside of it, then that's truthy. If you get an object, that's also truthy. If you get an array, that's also truthy. In this case, if I get undefined, undefined is falsy, that's not going to fly. Whereas, if I ask the object for something that it does have, you know, maybe it has something like some number in it, or it has true, or it has whatever else needs to be inside of it, then that's going to give me the results of that thing. That thing could be truthy. And so I'm going to get what's inside of it. In this case, whoops, if I'm asking, do you have, does have? And in that case, it's going to tell me, yep, I do have, does have. So that turns out to be true. Now, there are a few caveats that can happen with using things this way. I'm not going to delve into it right now, but it's basically, what if this does have has undefined in it? Or what if it has null in it? Or what if it has 0 in it? Or what if it has false in it? Then even though this actually does exist, but you're going to result in a falsy value. But let's ignore that for a second here, just to be lazy over here. We're just assuming, just like we assume that every contact has a first name without even checking first whether he even has a first name, we're going to assume now that every contact either does or doesn't have a likes. And if it does have a likes, then it's definitely going to have something truthy, like an array inside of it. So in that case, I'm just going to ask the question, do you likes, basically? Do you have something called likes? Or give me the value of likes, and then ask it as a question. What comes out of likes? Well, what comes out of likes is an array, as we saw over here. Likes has inside of it the whole entire array with all the things that he likes. And we're asking it as a question. We're asking, hey, JavaScript, do you know whether this array? And JavaScript answers, well, if I get an array, to me, that's truthy. So I'm going to say true. Whereas, if we passed something into this function over here that didn't exist, like the word likes with a lot of s's, and then it's going to go through this loop over here, and it's going to loop the counter up, and it's going to go inside of the array, inside of the object, and it's going to look for something called likes with a lot of s's. he is not going to result in an array. He's going to result in undefined. And this question over here is going to result in falsiness. It's not going to be a truth. It's not going to have that thing that it does have, an array. It's going to have a nothing because this thing does not exist in here. So this is one convenient way how we can ask, hey, object, do you have this thing inside of you or do you not have this thing inside of you? One way how to ask that is to just say, give me that thing inside of you. And then we see, do we get something truthy or do we get something falsy? If we get something truthy, aha, that means you have it to begin with. So now I know that you have something called likes. Or let's see if you have it. Give it to me. Oh, you don't have it? You have undefined, you have null, you have something that doesn't exist. Aha, that indicates that you don't have something called that. And that indicates to me that it doesn't exist. So in this case, I'm using that kind of trick of truthiness and falsiness to indicate to me, do you have that likes thing or do you not have that likes thing? And each time it's going to be different based on what we pass into the function. It's not always going to be likes. It could be something else. We need to pass in this prop variable that was sent into the function. That's what needs to be coded in here. Instead of the string likes, we say prop. And that's going to get us to find, does he have this thing inside of him? So now we have a loop. We go inside the loop one by one, the context, and we check to see whether their first name matches what we looked up and whether they have a property inside of them that is called whatever we passed in the second parameter. In this case, we're going to be looking for any of them inside of the array that has a first name of Harry and has a property called likes. If that gives us something truthy, then this is going to be true. If the name matches, then this is going to be true. And if both of them matches, then bingo. That means we found an object inside of this array, both that has a first name that matches and that has this property inside of it called the name of the thing that we passed in. In this case, it has something called likes. And now that we have that, we can continue doing that task that we have to be doing with it. If both are true, then return the value of that property. Give me back, return out of my function, whatever comes out of that property. Which property? The one that is inside the object, that is at this position in the array, that we looped through inside of all of our contexts. So we actually already have it right here. That same thing that we asked inside of the if statement, we can just go ahead and return over here. This is going to give us that very array that we were looking for if we looked for likes. What if someone passes in instead of likes? What if they pass in number? Then we're going to ask, hey, do you number? Do you have number inside of you? That's what it's going to ask over here. And if it returns that string of that number, then it's going to say, yes, I number. I have a number inside of me. That's truthy. Okay, then return that actual number. And in that case, it's not going to be an array because we're not looking for the likes array. We're looking for the number, which is a string with some numbers inside of it, whatever the string might be for that particular object. Whatever it is that you pass into the function, if you want to get its likes, if you want to get its number, if you want to get its first name, its last name, you could return that, and it's automatically going to return that specific thing in that specific object in that whole array that we're looping through. But we're not fully done because there's still a few things to deal with if we did not find any context that has this inside of it. And if we did find it, but it didn't have that particular property, I would highly encourage you guys to exercise this yourself. I'm going to copy out all of this code and paste it into the Slack channel, the chat room over there. So you guys can take this from where this is holding and finish the project so that else, otherwise, if our conditions do not meet, then you have to deal with it appropriately in two different ways. If he didn't find the first name, or if he did find the first name, but he didn't find the property inside of it. And a little hint over there is that you guys might need to break this out into two different if statements, because for each separate one, you're going to have to deal with it in a different way. And definitely go to this page on the Free Code Camp website, because he has a few more hints of his own, I believe. if I remember correctly. Oh, it has just a few examples over here of what you should try to call the function with and what the results should be if your program is doing what it should be doing. And I cannot overemphasize enough, guys. Practice, 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 practice. Do a bunch of this JavaScript stuff. Loop through arrays, make objects, make stuff inside of objects, inside of objects, inside of arrays. Do it inside of the browser console, so you can open up the arrows and like expand them and see, oh, I see what's inside of the array. Oh, I see what's inside of the object. Oh, I see there's an array inside of an object, inside of a function, inside of a thing. And play around with that, loop through it, process each one, finish this exercise over here. As a matter of fact, I would challenge some of you guys, if you guys could actually not look at the code that I'm going to be posting in the channel. I'm going to post it anyway, but try to see how much of this exercise you could do yourself by going to this link in the Free Code Camp page. Try to see if you could get this entire array of objects, loop through them, process them, do the exercise yourself. Either some parts of it that you might remember from memory from this class that we just did now, or just from the concepts that you remember yourself that we learned throughout this entire course. Or go ahead and look at the code, see what you can figure, and go from here to finish the exercise. I'm going to do one last little round of checking the chat room to see if there's any final things I could address. And okay, thank you very much for the thanks. I very much appreciate the appreciation. And yes, definitely go through the Free Code Camp exercises and do them, and do this one. I'm going to post a link to this one in the chat room. Try to see if you can solve it without necessarily copying from the code. But if you do, that's also fine. Exercising is always exercising. Oh, and try to see if you could put a breakpoint, a debugger breakpoint, and step through the code one by one in the JavaScript debugger, like we showed you guys on the scripting tag inside of the developer tools. When you press F12 or inspect element, there's the elements tab, the console tab, the sources tab, that's the one. And then you can go through the code by putting a little red dot on each line, stopping the computer, going through it step by step, and understanding in the computer's own mind, what is he doing and why is he doing it? And then you'll have the answer also to your question, what happens if you have two people with the same name, Harry? What's gonna happen in that case? And how you can control that and make it happen however you want it to do. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Sorry again for all the technical mishaps. Hopefully by Tuesday, we have everything figured out. And let's just say it straight out. We did slow down a bit for people to catch up and to try to follow along more and get their feet more wet and understanding and following with what this is all about and what we're learning. But by next class, guys, okay, catch up, practice, practice, because I think I'm gonna try to do the last two classes as total deep dives into what's the rest of the story, what else was happening behind the scenes that we missed, what else is there on the server side, this whole thing about sending information over the internet and getting it back and working with that information and getting stuff from the database. We're gonna do a deep dive on that in the last two classes. So hold on tight to your seatbelts, and we're gonna go general overview and show you guys hopefully where to go next as soon as this course is over, where you guys can learn and figure out the rest of the stuff that you need to know to complete this project and Yimritz Hashem to develop all of your skills as a coder. Good luck with that. Good luck with these exercises, and looking forward to seeing you guys in the next class. Thank you very much again.